Well, again, good afternoon. My name is Jack Giddens. I'm the chaplain at Sarasota Memorial Hospital here in Venice. I'm also a professor of humanities at the University of Maryland. And let's see, my background, I've been a chaplain for 20 years now. I've been a professor. I was a professor of world religions for 13 years at the University of West Florida. And of course, I'm a humanities professor now at Maryland. I have a doctorate in ministry from Denver Seminary, and then I did 3 years of postdoc at Harvard Medical School in their mind-body medicine program, which is the integration of soul and body in terms of health. And then I did a Templeton Fellowship at Duke Medical School. So my background is really sort of religion, but integrated with healthcare. And of course, grief is right smack in the middle of all that. So, and in fact, there's probably no subject I deal with more than the issue of grief as a healthcare chaplain. In fact, every week I probably have at least 5 to 7 patients who are dealing with the loss of a loved one. So grief is definitely what I do. I was also a hospice chaplain for 8 years, so I dealt with death and dying, and how to facilitate a good death, for a family, which can be very much a challenge. This is my book. It's called the Spiritual Comfort Index. When I was at Harvard, I invented a tool to measure what's called spiritual distress. And it's now being used at 14 hospitals in the US and about to be used at 200 clinics across the country, physician clinics, which is kind of nice. And we have a big article coming out in the Journal of Religion and Health. So, but this is my book, so if you want to see this nice Florida look to it there. Okay. Anyway, so that's that. All right. Well, what I'm going to do today is talk about our journey from grief to joy according to the world's primary religions, and I have 12 of them here listed. We're not, take a guess how many religions there are in the world, by the way. Anybody know? Over 4,000. That's a lot of religions. That's a lot. That really boggled me when I came across that. And what I'd like to do is, my style is a little bit interactive. So as you have questions, please, ask them. Or if you have something to say and you want to say, don't hesitate. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to look at really 4 segments of religions. First, the Western religions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And then the Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. And then the Asian religions, Confucianism, Taoism, Shinto. And then 3 indigenous religions, Zoroastrianism, which most people don't really know much about. And well, we probably don't know much about all these, right? Because unless this is your tradition, then you don't typically know that much about it. I happen to know a lot about it because I was a world religions professor, so it was my job to know about them. And peyote religion, and then Yoruba religion. And by the way, if you're not religious, that's not the point here. The point is that we all have religious thoughts, which, by the way, what's the definition of religion? It's really paradoxical because trying to define religion, you reduce it down to something that it's not, because it is by definition transcendent, right? It's beyond materiality, so it's hard to define it. But typically, a definition we use is religion is a cultural system for perceiving the transcendent. And we all are part of culture, and we're all part of systems, and we all perceive the transcendent. So in some sense, we're all religious in that regard, regardless of whether we're part of any sort of tradition, right? So, and also there's a distinction between spirituality and religion, of course, right? And that distinction really didn't come about until about the late 19th century, for the most part. So a lot of people will say, well, I'm spiritual, but not religious. Religion's a man-made thing, and that sort of thing. Well, yeah, but historically they were the same thing. Okay, so when I mean religion, I really also mean spirituality. That's my point. So, okay, let me start with Judaism. Well, what a place to start. Did you know that Jews have been run out of 270 countries over the last 2,000 years? That's astounding. Did you also know that Jews are less than, 2%, way less than 2% of the population, yet they've won 27% of the Nobel Prizes? Jews are a very uniquely special people. And Judaism is an incredible religion. I've taught it for many years. The key issue that we have typically, that I see a lot with Jewish patients, is when they're sick and when they're in a state of grief, is they have a tremendous sense of alienation, feelings of being alienated, feelings of being disregarded, overlooked, and even threatened because of this alienation. So anytime that you're feeling grief in the sense of feeling just in a state of existential crisis, where you just feel like you don't connect. You ever go to a party, and we all have, you go to a party and you feel like you're not connecting with anybody, you're like an alien there? You're friends with the Jews, because that's how Judaism feels. And that's a lot of times how we feel when we are in a state of grief. We are alienated from, not from others, but even from ourselves. In fact, that's the definition, the nursing definition of spiritual distress is a lack of intactness with oneself even. Okay? So grief is this terrible existentialist feeling that we're all alone in the world, and we're just kind of out on our own dinghy floating around, and nobody really knows what we're experiencing. So the journey regarding alienation is the journey of identity, is a reestablishment of your own sense of self whenever you're in a state of grief. And that's really the journey that we're on when we feel alienated. We're journeying toward identity with the goal being peace, to arrive at a state of peace. There's a passage in the Jewish Torah, Christian Old Testament, Isaiah 26:3. It says, thou will keep thee in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee because he trusts in thee. And that's a Jewish scripture passage that Jews often refer to, Isaiah 26:3. So alienation, identity, and arriving at peace is the essential track that Jews are on in their, pardon the pun, their exodus toward joy. Okay? A second is Christianity. And really Christianity is ultimately about the notion of forgiveness, that's what, according to Christians, that's what Christ came to do, is to offer forgiveness and reconciliation back to God. And so a lot of times when we're in a state of grief, what we're experiencing is a high degree of unforgiveness. You know what? I find a lot of times people are better at forgiving other people than they are themselves. I find that a lot, especially with patients in the ICU when they're staring death in the face and they're torturing themselves, really. And I spend a lot of my time helping them reunite with themselves and to really experience love again, themselves, and to love themselves. So unforgiveness, and it's a journey of trust, learning to trust again. Boy, I tell you, that was a big issue in my life. 15 years ago, my wife had an affair and destroyed our marriage. I had 2 little daughters. And I tell you, I went through a phase where every female I talked to, you must be a cheater. I'm sure you're a cheater. Trust was really hard for me. We feel the need for trust when we are in need of forgiveness and even forgiving ourselves. And so we're on a journey of trust, Christianity would say. And that journey arrives at what's called restoration. It's a place where you feel fully restored to who you really are and know yourself to be, even though you have been, in a sense, disenfranchised from yourself because of grief. Next is Islam. And Islam is a very interesting religion. Islam is really about deeds. And a lot of times we feel grief because of deeds in our lives, things that we've done that we're ashamed of or that we feel bad about for one reason or another. I get that a lot in the hospital. I'll get called in to talk with someone who wants to really basically unload on things they've done that they did 40 years ago, and haven't forgiven themselves for yet. And so Islam is about deeds. And then that is turned around by good deeds. Muslims believe that submission to Allah is what constitutes a release from grief. And that leads to what's called illumination, which is is an enlightenment for Muslims. We all experience that too, is we torture ourselves for things that we've done in the past, and then we try to do good things to make that up. But it doesn't always work that way. We end up having to just forgive ourselves, and that's really tough to do. Muslims believe in good deeds is the way to go in terms of making that happen. All right. So those are the basics of the Western religions. Any questions at this point? Any thoughts? Anything sound unusual? No?
Baha'i fit in the Western or the Eastern?
That would be Western. Yep. Yep. And again, there are so many other religions we could go into, and these are just the basic ones. Our Eastern religions, Hinduism. Hinduism is an amazing religion. It's extremely complex. It's extremely eclectic. It's extremely contradictory in some respects. And the issue in Hinduism is very similar to the issue in all of Eastern religion, is the issue of attachment. That when we attach to the material world in some way, what happens, according to Hindus, is you misalign your soul. Your soul is called your Atman, and you misalign that with the universal soul called Brahma. And then what happens is you facilitate a state of grief to the degree to which you are in disalignment with the universal God, which is Brahma. Okay? And so you're attached. Attachment is such a difficult concept because it's hard to live our lives without attaching to something, right? I mean, how do we stay free from attachments? And so the goal is alignment and then release, which is called moksha. So what happens is when we detach from things that we shouldn't be attached to, we experience this release that comes. Hindus wear the bindi on the forehead. Everybody knows the bindi. That represents the third eye, which is a reminder to see life, see beyond what your eyes see. Okay? See to true reality, which is spiritual. It's not material, it's spiritual. And so we facilitate our own grief because of what we remain attached to. That's essentially the teaching from Hinduism. And then Buddhism. The word Buddha means awakened one, for example. In contrast to Christ, which means anointed one who is sent, the Buddha was the awakened one. In fact, there's a story about a Buddhist monk who he sewed his eyelids open, which, by the way, don't do that. That's a very bad thing to do medically, I learned. But he sewed his eyelids open. The idea being he didn't want to miss anything, that every time you blink, you miss something. And so being awake and aware to true reality is essentially what Buddhism is all about. Buddhists teach that your grief and suffering in life is a function of your desires. So if you rid yourself of desire, then you no longer suffer. Of course, how can you live your life without desires, right? I mean, our world, what is our world about? It's about money and power and control. It's about things. It's about materialism, right? And the Buddhists would say, but the desiring of those things is what's facilitating your grief. So the key is to, what Christians would say, let go and let God. A Buddhist would just say, detach from those desires. I used to, when I was driving to my job at the university, I used to drive by this car lot and see this green Mercedes there on and I would just lust after that car every time. Yeah, it was like a little puppy, scratching on the window. And after a while, I realized I am making myself miserable because I cannot afford that car. So I need to stop looking. You know what I did? I took a different route to work. Solved the problem. Our desires. What is it that you want? Buddhists say you're suffering because of what you're trying to get control of, right? And so the key to getting control is to let go of control, right? Which is kind of a nice little trick, little paradox. But our desires, what is it that you're wanting? What is it? I remember when I got to that place with my wife and my kids, I had to get to a place of saying, I can't have that. So I need to stop wanting it. Do you ever get to that place? Stop wanting it. It's a lot easier said than done, though, isn't it? A lot easier said than done. How do you live a desireless life? So the Buddhists would say the way to do that is through what's called emptying. Sunyata is the word for it. You empty yourself, okay, of desire. And you become sort of, in a sense, one with the universe. You let the universe move you and the power of the universe move you. And let the power of the universe fill you. That's what you want. But it won't fill you if you're desiring something. Have you ever tried to like run, and the faster you try, the slower you run? And the more likely you're going to stumble? You know, that's why you look at sprinters. That's why they stay loose, right? Because they just got to get in the flow. If you're trying too hard, right? I used to played baseball in college. And you can't go up to the plate and go, okay, keep the bat up, turn into the ball. You can't be thinking about it and doing it at the same time, right? You have to let go of what you're wanting to do and quote unquote just do it. It's hard to sound like the Nike ad, but that's essentially what emptying is. To empty yourself means to empty of desires. What is it that you're wanting? I find that all the time to be a problem in my life, is wanting something. Then I have to realize, just wait, let it get delivered to you, instead of wanting it, right? And this results in a condition called nirvana or bliss. Nirvana is an interesting concept too. It's essentially physiological. It's a physiological, psycho-emotional state. That's what bliss is. And as we let go of our desires and sort of let the universe have its way, so to speak, then eventually we arrive at that state of bliss. It's a nice place to be in dealing with grief. And then there's the religion called Jainism. Anybody haven't heard of Jainism? The word means conqueror, but it's a conqueror of the inner self instead of the conqueror like a real estate conqueror or a military conqueror. The key in Jainism that facilitates suffering is what we call absolutism. Okay, absolutism. That is, by the way, you ever hear anybody say that's absolutely correct? Really? Absolutely? You sure? Is there anything that's you're absolutely correct? A Jain would say, if you are an absolutist, you are not only facilitating your own relative ignorance, but you're also unable to see reality as it truly is. And I work in an environment in the medical field. It's all approximations. It's all science. And sometimes we get so sure, we think we're so right about something, and it turns out we're wrong. I got a good story for you. About 8 months ago, there was a patient. They had probably 2 days to live. And I counseled his wife, and she said, at what point should I withdraw care? When should I do that? And she wanted to know my answer. And I told her, the best thing you can do is just take the doctor's advice. And if the doctor says, it's time to withdraw care, that's about the best we can do. And she thought about it some more, and she said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to withdraw the care. You know what? 6 weeks later, that guy walked out of that hospital. And the doctors were like, we have no explanation for this. And they were on the beach walking, and they sent us a cell phone of them, walk. It was unbelievable. I mean, we were all standing there going, that's just, there's no explanation for that. You cannot explain that. So, I don't even know what I was talking about. I get carried away. Absolutism, yeah. Well, we were absolutely right. See, I feel really terrible now with the advice I told her, because the doctors were wrong. They were just wrong, and maybe they weren't wrong. They didn't know. How about that? They just couldn't do it. Anyway, that happens more than you think. When we think we're right, absolutely, and it turns out we don't know. All right. So that's why absolutism, according to Jains, facilitates our own grief and suffering. When we are so sure, in our society, we think we're so right, and maybe we're not. Was it Socrates used to say, if you think you know, you don't yet know as you ought to know. It's pretty good advice, isn't it? Of course, they poisoned it, but anyway, we'll skip that part. And that leads to the journey of empathy. So absolutism facilitates or blunts the journey of empathy. So when we're non-absolutist, we're now on that road to empathy. And what is empathy? It's the ability to feel what others feel and to see from their perspective, right? And then that leads to what's called Kavala, which is omniscience. The goal of Jainism is to be able to see the whole picture, right? To have wisdom in a globalist sense, okay? And so we want to avoid absolutism because it facilitates our own grief and suffering. All right, so those are the Eastern religions. And I would characterize them as being very paradoxical. Now the Asian religions. Any questions about, by the way, the Eastern religions? Anybody? Okay. The Asian religions. Confucianism. Wow, Confucius was quite a teacher. He was a fabulous teacher. Some people say Confucianism is not really a religion, it's a philosophy of life. But then if you want to think about it, just about every religion is a philosophy of life, isn't it? So, it's characterized also as a religion. But the issue in Confucianism is the issue of respect. What I see a lot with patients in grief or people in grief is a fundamental disrespect of themselves in many regards. People will have been so harmed by this crazy world that we live in, that the notion of respect in our society, I don't know about you, have we lost a lot of respect for each other? I think we have. Yeah. Aren't we really rude? A rude culture, unfortunately. And Fox News, MSNBC, Blue State, Red State, all this fighting and all this rudeness has caused a fundamental lack of respect. But you know what? It's also caused people to disrespect themselves in many regards. Because that respect starts within, with yourself. Respecting yourself and taking care of yourself. Really good self-care is at the heart of health, period. So it's disrespect. And of course, the remedy for that in Confucianism is respect. And what Confucius argued was that the goal of religion and society at large is harmony, is to get to a place where you respect the position of a person regardless of how you feel about them, regardless of whether you like them. Yeah. And in our society today, we really have a struggle with that, respecting position and that sort of thing. Some would trace it back to Watergate, that was really sort of the beginning of in the 20th century of when our respect for authority and respect for institutions started to really degenerate. I don't know. I'm sure it goes back a lot farther than that too. But so when we're in a state of grief, we have a tendency to disrespect ourselves, and we have to address that. Right? Taoism or Taoism. The issue there is being out of sync. What Taoism is all about is being in universal harmony, in harmony with the universe. Meaning that, you know what it means to be in sync, right? To be sort of connected, connecting with yourself, connecting with others, connecting with life as you need to be living it. When you are in a state of grief, though, you are somewhat out of sync. Okay? And so one of the goals is to facilitate coming back into sync with your universe. Right? And that synchronization, and with the goal being universality, to be connected to the larger universe in a proper way, but your local universes as well. Okay, so that's what Taoism essentially is all about. There's a concept in Taoism called Wu Wei Wu. It means action by non-action. It's the idea. It's back to the don't try so hard kind of thing, right? Let go. Let the power of the universe and your connectedness with the entire universe be your strength, and let that drive you, okay, instead of your own grasping and control. Get in sync, in other words, with the entire universe. That's kind of the goal of this, and that's what Wu Wei Wu is about. And then there's Shinto. The word Shinto means way of the gods, and that's the indigenous Japanese religion, Shinto. And the goal in Shinto is really interesting. It's cleanness, and to be clean, not just physically, but to be clean inside, okay? To feel a sense of purity, that sense that you are connected properly to yourself, and that you are clean and all together, okay? And so the goal ultimately in Shinto is purity. Of course, Shinto is all about, and I could lecture on all these religions all over the place. I'm trying to reduce this down to something really applied to grief, but I'll leave it at purity. All right, so that's the Asian religions. By the way, I was a missionary in China and Hong Kong, the Philippines, back in the 1980s, and I was imprisoned in Guangzhou for American, what would they call it? American religious activity, which was really, but I thought I was Indiana Jones. I mean, it was a lot of fun being in jail in China. And it's like, wow, this is great. Anyway, yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. The Asian culture is very unique and very originalist in its perspectives on reality. And cleanliness and cleanness is such an important value in that culture that in a way very different, I think, from our culture. All right, so the Asian cultures. And then the indigenous cultures. And the word indigenous just means native, right? Native religions. One is Zoroastrianism, which is a religion that a lot of people don't know that much about. And it's an ancient religion. It's been kind of taken over. But it was the first religion that really dealt with the notion of the idea that life is all about a struggle between good and evil. That every moment that you are living your lives, you are engaged in a choice, a choice to either do good or to do evil. And it was actually the forerunner also to, it wasn't the forerunner, but it laid the groundwork for Christianity and Islam to be understood and grasped. But it's called Zoroastrianism. And the key issue in Zoroastrianism is what's a concept called druj, which means chaos. That a lot of times when we're in grief, we're actually in a state of emotional and psychological and even intellectual chaos. And so the goal is to get to a reordering, a restructuring of our lives. That's what Zoroastrianism is essentially all about. And it's a very interesting religion. So disorder, structure, and that leads to order in our lives. When we're really in a state of grief, when I was going through grief, I would lose my wallet. I'd forget to, I've misplaced things. I can't find my keys. Yeah, anybody ever feel that way? You're just so confused. Yeah.
The new normal.
The new normal. Yeah. And it's so tricky because I like to think of myself as a creative person, not so ordered and structured and militaristic or whatever. On the other hand, the order is very important in our lives too. And so because we can't really sustain in a fundamental state of chaos for too long. And yet when we're in a state of grief, we're in a state of chaos to a large degree. Think about that. That's what I deal with a lot in the hospital, is helping people to deal with that chaos that they're in, because now they're asking the extreme existential questions of life. Why did this happen to me? Or was my life worth it? Did it mean anything? I had a guy ask me that the other day. I had a guy ask me. He said, I would really like to kill myself because I hate society and I'm so tired of this life and I don't want to go on anymore. And a lot of my job is talking to people in that state of mind. And how do you say, I agree with you in the sense that culture is a mess and the world is a mean place and where's the love, and sometimes even especially with Christian patients, I'll say, Jesus taught two things. Forget what men have done to Christianity and religion, okay, for a second, and look at what Jesus taught, okay, which is different. Jesus taught, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He taught love. He was the original Beatle right there. All you need is love, right? My jokes aren't working today. See, I got off bad with the pirate joke, so it's just been a debacle since. Love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself. And what I also do sometimes with patients, when they ask me that question, they'll ask me, what's the purpose of life? Does anybody know what the purpose of life is? To learn? Okay. Everyone's different. Okay. Any other ones? Anybody?
To do this one better than the last.
To do this one better than the last one? Okay. When I ask in my philosophy courses, I ask my college students that question. And they'll say, to be happy or reproduction or, All that. It's really a hard question, actually, to answer. But actually, I've grappled with it. I think that the purpose of life is to love and be loved. I really do. Which means that there's going to be grief and pain and suffering along the way. But it's all about love. And so what I tell that patient is, not only I think does God want you to love God, others, and yourself, God wants you to love the gift of life that you have. The very gift of life that you have. And that usually startles the patient. They go, God, I haven't thought of that. You're right. Love the gift of life. Do you remember a time in your life when you were just happy? You just loved your life. You remember that? Maybe it was in 8th grade or something, or you're riding a horse, or that's where I want to get that patient back to, is that place where they realize. And I'll say things like, that this could be my last day. I could walk out of this room, have a heart attack, and I'm gone. That's all we've got is right this moment. How about we love the gift of life we have? So I got carried away on that one too. Let's see. That was Zoroastrianism, right? Order. All right. Peyote religion. It's also the Native American church. Peyote. Everybody knows what peyote is. It's a cactus out west, and they eat it. You can smoke it too, I think, but you eat it. And you eat the cactus buttons. And what it does, it's a hallucinogenic. So it's just like LSD. Well, not as good as that. I wouldn't know. I don't do LSD, but it's a hallucinogenic, and what you do with it is, but it causes you to have thoughts about God, which is really interesting. Which really makes me want to eat some peyote because I want to see what that's about. But it's mainly geared around the notion of physical pain. Okay? And so a lot of times, obviously, when we're in physical pain, we want something to deal with the pain, bring on the morphine or whatever, right? Well, that's what peyote religion really is all about. When we're in a state of true grief and suffering, we're in a physical state of pain. Realize that? It's not just, psychological or emotional. It's a physical. You are physically in a state of pain. Okay? In fact, my spiritual comfort index, well, I showed you the book already. There are 4 questions on it. And the first question is, how uncomfortable are you because of pain or physical conditions at this time? Because pain is part of spiritual distress. Physical pain is part of that. And so when we're in physical pain, we need something like that. And that's what peyote religion's about. Oh, and we have all this medical marijuana now, right? So that's out there in society at large. One of my psychiatrist friends, he really needles me about how I believe, spirituality is the key to solving all this, not physical medicine. I believe in physical medicine too, and we need that whenever we're really in a state of grief. Okay, so you eat the peyote buttons, and it causes a hallucination. It causes you to come to a place of physical peace, really, essentially, in your life. And we all have those things, right? Comfort food, maybe? Fried chicken? Yeah, there you go. Okay. Chocolate for me. Chocolate. I'm a chocolate guy. All right. And then finally, Yoruba religion. You may not have anybody heard of Yoruba religion? Anybody? That's the primary indigenous religion in Africa. And Yoruba religion is really essentially about the notion of guilt. That Yorubans believe that they cannot please God. He's named Olodumare. So they live in this state of perpetual guilt. And I think when we are in a state of grief, a lot of times we are feeling a lot of guilt in our lives. Yeah. I have patients all the time who think that they caused their condition that they're in. Like if I had just done this or if I had just done that, well, you know what? You're also 91, and things wear out, and so much guilt that we heap upon ourselves. A lot of times, most of the time, it's false guilt too, where we blame ourselves for things that we really don't have any business blaming ourselves for. So we're back to needing to love ourselves and forgive ourselves, right? So guilt, and Yorubans then deal with this through submission, through submission to this high God, Olodumare, who is impossible to please. Anybody had anybody in their life that's impossible to please? Wow, I did. My father, he could not be pleased. There's nothing I could do that could please him. So my whole life I felt that sense, that need to keep submitting to a standard that I just could not keep all the time, you know? And that's a tough place to be. And finally, appeasement is the ultimate goal of that. You know, sometimes I think that's part of what's wrong to a large degree with blacks or African American self-image is their indigenous culture sometimes facilitates this impossible standard that they cannot please God, that it's impossible to please God. You know, Africans have a tendency to be very highly religious and highly colorful in their religion, but also with a very, very low self-image, I think, sometimes. And that comes a lot from their indigenous tradition. All right, so there they are, 12 religions. What time is it? How are we doing? Okay. 12 religions that really are primary, and they're all part of how we look at things, even though we may not be part of any of these religions. Anybody here consider themselves religious? Yeah. Okay, all right, so, yeah. Religion really asks three big questions, and you see this in every religion. Number one, why am I here? What is the purpose of life, which I've now revealed to you? Why am I here? What is the universe? What is this? How did it get here? Why is there something instead of nothing? That kind of philosophical question. And then the question, how should I live my life? Those are the three questions that really drive all religions. But in a larger sense, they drive our lives too, because we're all searching for who am I and why am I here? What is my purpose, right? What is my design? What is my calling, if you want to call it that? Why am I doing this? Why am I here? And then, what is the universe? What is my universe? What do I do with my circumstances? And what's the best thing to do with my circumstances? And then how should I live my life? Which is, are there universal truths that I should live by? Or is life all made up? We just make up our values based on, they're situational and contextual only. They're not universals, and how can I know that, right? When we're in a state of grief, we ask those questions in a much more acute fashion too. I think we ask them in a way to where they become much more important. With my students, in fact, the first assignment I always give them is to give me your religious history. Write your religious history. And a lot of students go, I hate religion. The only thing I liked about Vacation Bible School was the apple juice, or the Catholics are so rigid, all those bad things. I think religion becomes more important the older we get, because we have now gone through a lot of damaging things in life, and it causes us to ask the larger questions, and we need answers to those questions so that we can heal. And so religion becomes more and more important the older we get. All right, questions anybody has? Yes, go ahead.
Well, just in terms of grief, I know for me, grief is more than just losing somebody. I think grief can come in all kind of different ways, or situations can cause grief. It's just not about losing someone.
I'm sure.
And then I relate most to the alienation. I know you didn't ask what I related to, but these were just that's what I felt most in my grief. It felt very private, because it was very specific and private to us and to me.
Right.
But then also I want to know, how do you fortify yourself with having to deal with this every day?
Oh, yeah. It's funny. I mean, on the one hand, I'm highly trained to do it, so a lot of it's skill. But then, my work is just so fantastically interesting that there's not a day that goes by that something extremely interesting doesn't happen. And so I feel kind of blessed to have a job like that. On the other hand, like when I went through my divorce, what helped me was talking to people about their issues. Because it was a good outlet. I could, in fact, I hate to say it this way, but when you look at other people's stuff, your stuff doesn't look so bad. You know what I mean? And so that helped me. That helps me a lot right there. I spend a lot of my time essentially empowering people who are extremely disempowered because of grief. Right? That's really, I pack their souls with something that they can live by. Because a lot of times people are really disempowered when they're sick or when they're in a state of grief. So it's about empowering people, and because again, people are not intact anymore. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to word this. With you listening to people like thinking suicide, or thinking of people that have lost somebody, or people that have gone through PTSD and going through all this stuff, do you absorb any of that, and does that take a toll on you?
Yeah. I have a.
I'm being selfish for asking this reason.
Oh, yeah.
Because I unload on my poor therapist for PTSD.
Right.
And she makes you go over it and over it and over it and over it again, the bad part of it.
Oh, I see.
guess
That's
it's
what
called
you're saying.
EMDR, something like that. Therapy is for PTSD.
Oh.
But then I'm thinking, is she absorbing all this?
Yeah.
And this kind of sounds like you listen to a lot of
It's true, and my boss gets on to me. She's a nurse, and she says, "Work-life balance, Jack. Go home, take time off. You're working too much." And I have workaholic tendencies, and I have an empathic personality, meaning I naturally feel what you're feeling. I can see from where you're coming. I naturally do that. In Myers-Briggs, everybody knows the Myers-Briggs, right? Yeah. INFJ personality type. It's like a therapist type. That's the type. So I do that naturally. I find it so incredibly interesting, though, that it keeps me going. But you're right. At a certain point, you have to really detach from it. Back to attachment in Hinduism, right? You have to detach from feeling too much of that. I'll tell you one thing. For example, I couldn't work in a children's hospital because I'd be walking around crying all day. Seeing kids with cancer. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do that. When I was a hospice chaplain, and I had a 15-year-old patient, and I was just destroyed. Dealing with that. But I guess I'm equipped to deal with adults, and not let it bother me too much. I see people getting burned out all the time about this, so it's possible. I guess just for some reason I'm able to detach from it.
Yeah, because they're crying and you're like listening.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. And you don't want to be the one crying. You're supporting them. You let them do that, and you're there to support them. So, and I'm a listener of a person, so I really enjoy listening. Of course, as a chaplain, that's what you need to be able to do. Oh, I was going to tell them. I forgot to tell them what a healthcare chaplain is. I should have said this up front. Healthcare chaplaincy is a relatively new field, okay? And a lot of people don't know what a healthcare chaplain is or does. I have it all the time, and people go, "Hey, preacher man, can you come down here?" Or, "Hey, pastor." This is not a church. It's a hospital. I'm not a pastor, right? So a lot of people don't know what a healthcare chaplain is or what we do. Here's what a healthcare chaplain is: a healthcare professional with a religious-oriented background, or however you want to say that provides what's called spiritual care. So what I do, I look at your spirit, I call it your soul, okay? And in the West, we believe in the soul. In the East, that the spirit is more of that idea. But I'm like a doctor of the soul. You have a doctor of the body, I'm a doctor of the soul. I come in and I look at your soul. I'm looking at you as a person apart from everything else. Your intellectual, your cultural background, all that. I'm looking at your soul, your spirit. And is there distress in that soul? That's what I'm looking for. So that's what a healthcare chaplain is. It's a healthcare professional who focuses on providing what's called spiritual care. Okay? And there's a big body of research now that's out there. Harold Koenig at Duke Medical School, where I was a Templeton Fellow. In fact, he and I co-invented this Spiritual Comfort Index screening. He's thousands now of articles that have been studies that have been done that show a direct link between spirituality and physical health. there's now a, not provable, but a strong correlation between your spirituality, and it's a very positive one, by the way, too. So it's its own unique field. And so come over and buy me coffee sometime at the hospital. You have an open invitation to do that. Other questions? We've got about 5 minutes. Other questions?
I just have a question, because I think most people, like with grief, the first thing ask, why did this happen to me? Like, you know, and I was just thinking, like, how do you answer? Because I know the why is the first thing, why? Like, why us? Why, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know how would you answer, like, you know, people that are asking, like.
That's a tough one. What do you do with that? Well, because you were bad. No, you don't want to say that. That's the wrong thing. The way I usually walk into that is to say, that is a wonderful question. That's a difficult question. We're all asking that question. We live in a very difficult world, and a lot of things happen to us, and we don't necessarily know why yet. Maybe we can't know why yet. Maybe there's some other things that need to happen before we're gonna know that. That's typically how I walk into that question. And then they'll say, yeah, I see what you're saying. And, I wish I hadn't done this. And then I'll say, but that really has nothing to do with this, does it? I mean, these bodies, they wear out. That's the main thing. They're not meant to last forever. And, God, we're all facing that. That's when I also get into, this could be my last day too. We're all right here in this present moment. That's really all we have, if you think about it. So why did this happen? Yeah, we can go into organic reasons, we can go into lifestyle reasons, we can go into intellectual reasons, et cetera. But the reality is, sometimes we don't fully know why. And we have to be comfortable with that ambiguity, because that's really where we live, if you think about it. And again, back to James for a moment, don't be absolutist, leave it open, because you don't know, they might get out of that bed and walk out. It might happen. And so we don't fully know. So we have to, and that's where the priority of faith comes in. And that's where faith is important in religion, because if we had all the answers, we wouldn't have to have any faith. And since we don't have all the answers, that puts a priority on faith and hope too, right? We hope for something better ahead, So, good question, though. That's a tough one.
My husband's uncle, he passed away in 93, but he had lost his son years before, obviously it happened to us. But he was saying, don't ask the why, because we don't know why, but he's up there now, so he knows why.
Yeah, right. I'm one who says, ask anything you want. Feel free to ask anything you want. I'm also someone who would say anything you want to say. If you have to use the F word, use the F word. Cough it up, Be honest with yourself. Be honest, because that's where the healing's going to come from, is in that honesty. But it is a challenge, and sometimes we don't really know the answer. Like I said, those doctors, they don't know the answer to that, why that happened. They can't tell you. They don't know. Something jiggered the wires and started a healing process in that patient. Before you knew it, they were fine, and they were about to die. So just, what is that? In the Jewish Torah, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Because, when you lean on your own understanding, every time I've thought, and I've done a doctoral dissertation and done a lot of scholarship, every time I think I really fully have it understood, then I go, wait a minute, it could be that too, or, oh, I saw another study on that opens up a whole new way of looking at that. So I didn't really know what I was doing. See? There's an old saying in higher education is learning more and more about less and less till you know everything about nothing. Right? By the time you get your thesis statement, boiled down, and I read everything in the world ever published on spiritual conflict up to 2007. Ever published. Okay? That's a lot of reading. And you narrow it down and you think you finally have it, and then somebody comes up with something, you go, oh gosh, I never saw that, all right? Or a whole different way of looking at it. So again, and I'm a big believer in education, but trying not to get puffed up about it, you know what I mean? And again, I'm not for this radical right wing, oh, let's do away with education, let's all go be electricians and plumbers either. I'm not on that side of it. I mean, I believe getting an education is very important and valuable. I just believe in don't take yourself so seriously, because you might be wrong. You might get it wrong. And sometimes I think that's the great value of education is it lets you know when you're wrong, that you're not right about everything. How about that? So, anyway.
Jack, one last question.
Yes.
There were a couple of us talking about this morning. When you are the person in grief and you have people coming to you to give you sayings, they're in a better place. You're going to get over this real soon.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be
all
okay.
those kinds of things.
Can I share a mistake I made with that one time?
Sure.
When I was doing my residency at Baptist Hospital in Pensacola, Florida, it was 3 a.m, and I was on call. I was in the room, and I got buzzed by the nurse to come see this lady's husband of 64 years had passed away. And you know what I did? I got dressed and I went in the room, and I said, it's going to be okay. You know what she said to me? She said, it is not going to be okay, and you can leave my room. I was like, oh man, I messed up. So the next day at group, I had to confess, that's not the thing to say, right? What do you say in a situation like that, by the way? You say, what do you say in a situation like that? You say, I'm so sorry for your loss. Or I can't imagine how you must be feeling right now. Something like that. One thing you don't say, you Christians out there, don't say, all things work together for good.
Oh my God.
You heard that one? Don't say that. Because, pardon?
Just be there.
Right, exactly. Another time when I was on call, I got called down to the ER, and this 24-year-old, she was about 6 months pregnant, and her husband had broken his neck in a motorcycle accident, was in the ER, and the nurse called me down because she wanted somebody to sit with her out in the lobby. And I kid you not, I sat there for 5 hours just holding her hands, looking her in the eyes, and not saying a word. Do you know how hard that is?
But it's the best thing to do.
That was the only, oh, you know what she said to me when we were done? She goes, I mean, it's like she came to, she was in such shock. And she came to and she goes, thank you for talking with me. Anyway, but that was the wrong, sometimes you're so crushed. Have you ever been so crushed that somebody just touches you and the tears again? You get that a lot in a hospital. So, you want to be careful with your words. A lot of times saying nothing is the right thing to say because it's so profoundly difficult that, you're just going to sound like, you're trying to teach them something or something silly like that. And
It's really about just being there.
it is. It is. And
People themselves are not looking for words, they're just looking for just somebody to be with them. No advice needed, no anything, just.
And that's called, in spiritual care, that's called ministry of presence, where you're just there with them and you think you're not doing anything, but you are. You're just not doing, woo again, action by non-action. That's what you're doing, is you're being with them. On the other hand, they also want a chaplain. So who you are is also important. Like you can't just can't take the janitor and go, hey, go sit with, no, that's not what they want either. So there's a sense in which, we're self-aware of who we are and who somebody else is, and there's communication going on there, regardless of whether there are any words going on there. So I'm going to inspire all of you to become a chaplain now, right? It really, actually, truthfully, it's just amazingly interesting, wonderful work to do. And but yeah, you can get burned out too. You have to practice good self-care. You can't walk around telling other people love yourself and take care of yourself and you're not doing it yourself. you've got to you got to walk the talk, so to speak. You have to take care of yourself too. And that's my key professional weakness is I definitely overdo it, definitely overwork. And so anyway, all right. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It's great to be with you. Appreciate it. And I wish you all well. And again, if you ever want to come talk to me, I work at the hospital. Just come in, walk in there and say, I want to talk to Chaplain Jack. I'm going to buy him some coffee and some chocolate.